Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm hoping that people can hear me.
Yes.
Fantastic. That's the very helpful little bit of feedback that I needed just there. My name is James Davison. I'm chair of the King's College Construction Law Association. This is our first event of the year and the first event we've had in some time. We're very grateful that you all joined us, albeit virtually on this occasion. In this room, physical room that we have here in the... So we are here, you have 4 speakers for you this evening, all of whom are here in London are going to be speaking from this end of the camera. We've got Shai, who's going to be starting first. Then we're going to have George Mello, then Nicola Ibbotson, and then concluding with David Sawtell. The whole point of this evening is to help you, the students, get ready for the undertaking that is the dissertation, the extended piece of writing that you have to undertake in order to succeed in your masters. We hope it will prove informative, may even provide some instances of things not to do, and also some insights that you might not find in other places. But the first of the speakers that we got this evening is Shai Jackson. Shai is a solicitor at Bryan, Cave, Leighton and Paisner. The reason we got Shai to speak to you this evening is because he was the top dissertation writer in the year that he did his masters. And perhaps therefore it is no surprise that he ended up having something to do with the Centre for Construction Law in the longer term. Many of you may well have already have been lectured by him on the course. I wonder, really, in terms of saying anything about Shai, it's probably best to just hand over directly to him, because I know Shai has to get away. We'll take questions to Shai on what he says immediately afterwards. I'm going to go onto mute, and I'm going to hand over to Shai. Mr. Jackson, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, James. Yes, I think the important bit is I was a student on the course, and I did do a dissertation many, many years ago. But I suspect my advice is probably no longer relevant. It's about kind of going to books and libraries and shelves, which I think people do a lot less now. So I'll try to give you a bit of the dissertation supervisor's perspective, and I probably won't say that much. I think it's more an opportunity for you to ask questions, and hopefully I can answer some of them. And I think it's worth starting by making it clear that you shouldn't get too hung up about who your dissertation supervisor is and who you get. If you get a good one, that's very helpful and they can help you and make it a bit easier. But to be honest, if you get somebody who's perhaps not quite as helpful or not quite as responsive, it's not truly the end of the world. You're still going to do very well as long as you do what everybody should be doing, which is to have a good topic, work hard, plan well for it, and get a bit of feedback from other people. And George, I mean, who'll be speaking later, is a great example how you can do incredibly well in your dissertation, even if you don't have such a great supervisor. And I think the quality to that is that all supervisors are different. Do remember that. So take everything I say with a bit of a pinch of salt, see what they want. And to the same extent, and I don't mean this against this evening, everybody out there is different. So listen to all the advice and listen to what people have to say. But what I found as a dissertation supervisor, everybody does things their own way. And what may work very well for other people may not work quite as well for you. But the good thing, it gives you options. It gives you things to think about. And some of it perhaps you should adopt, and some of it perhaps you might think it's not quite for me. And some people are incredibly organized and have a program and a plan from day one and follow it rigidly. Some people have a program and plan from day one but don't quite follow it. And I know people have done it at the last minute and have still done very well. So I think the trick is really to find what works best for you. And before speaking sort of about the supervisor angle, I thought I'll give you kind of my 2 pence worth of what you need to think about with your dissertations. The first thing is really to find something you find interesting and enjoy. It makes life a lot easier, and something that is relevant to your practice. Because again, when I was looking for something, I looked for something that I could do easily. I wasn't looking to give myself too huge a challenge, and I'm a bit lazy. So find something that kind of comes quite naturally if you can. The other bit of advice from what I've seen from people is don't be overly ambitious. And what I really mean is do challenge yourself, but try not to come up with things which require you to cover too much, or don't have a dissertation topic that really means you have to write a book and cover too much. Find a good topic, but I think the way it works is to doing a narrow topic in greater depth is better than covering a very wide area, but not doing it in great detail. And the other thing is you always need a bit of an angle. You need a bit of an opinion, a bit of a perspective. It's very easy to do dissertation where you just describe a lot of things or describe cases or what other people have said, but it's always nice that you do it, but then you offer your own opinion, your suggestions, your theory. You may agree or disagree, take a great decision and explain why it's completely wrong, rather than just be descriptive. And the other thing is, I know some people like to do surveys, and some of you guys are quite quantitative in a way, and it's quite nice to get numbers and put them in graphs and try to draw conclusions. And sometimes it works, but I think there's always a bit of a challenge to find the right questions, have enough people to give you answers so it can be meaningful. What I do like, I think, are interviews. And I think a lot of you will have access to people within the industry. And I think sometimes having half a dozen in-depth interviews with people on the topic you want to cover gives you things you can refer and quote in your dissertation and good evidence. And you can test stuff instead of launching 20 questions, see your response, and then producing lots of graphs. So looking at the supervisor's perspective, how do you get the most of your supervisor? Well, contact them early, start the dialogue, have a chat. What you want to do is really to test your idea, get a bit of guidance, and come out of that first meeting with a clear idea of what you're doing and a skeleton and a bit of a structure, or at least some ideas. Because the first thing I find, which is useful to do, and it's a bit like construction, the more you spend on designing, the more easier construction is. Have a think about your structure, introduction and conclusion easy, a bit of a background, a bit of analysis, and then a bit of critique. Draft your chapters, almost do your contents page first, and then slowly start filling it in. And then just discuss with your supervisor and see what works best for them, how many meetings they're happy to give, when does it work, have a bit of a program. I usually tend to say, send me that skeleton, let's see how it works. And then when you do one chapter, send it to me as a draft. So if I've got any comments, I'll give it to you early on one chapter instead of giving me your full draft a week before it's due. And then I give you lots of comments, which you will find very unhelpful. So plan for it. The usual advice when you're writing short paragraphs, lots of subheadings, make it really clear. And that makes it easier for the supervisor to read, but more importantly, for the person who's marking it. But otherwise, I think, as I've said before, just see what works best for your particular supervisor. Don't be afraid to contact them, ask them, and they will tell you if they're too busy or can't do it. But most of us, we recognize we're doing it to help you. We've said we're willing to do it, and we are committed to it. So as long as you give us enough time and warning, we will do the best to help you. Not last minute requests 2 days before it's due. That's probably not going to work. And I guess the other thing is, not all supervisors will give you the same level of feedback, and we're probably not proofreaders. And also find 1 or 2 other people who will also be happy to read your dissertation, give you a bit of feedback. And then my final bit of advice, assuming, which I think is a safe assumption, that you will do well, 2 things to think about. First of all, you probably would have put a great amount of effort into your dissertation and produced a long piece. Try to publish it if you can. There are lots of journals out there who will be interested in long, properly researched pieces. And if you've done all the work, you might as well publish it and get the credit. And if you think you've done really well, then let me encourage you to then submit it to the Hudson Prize that the SEL has every year. I think the current prize is about £3,000, which is quite a decent amount. Not surprisingly, not a huge amount of people kind of take the effort to write a 5,000 word academic paper. So we're not always overwhelmed with proposals. So if you've done a good dissertation, you've done all the work, and you are allowed to submit it for the Hudson Prize and indeed other prizes that other international SCLs have out there. So you might as well give it a go. And I think that's where I'm going to end, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic, Shai. Thank you very much for making your time available to us this evening. The perspective from someone who has supervised a great many dissertation students over the years and taken them or helped them achieve their own success, hopefully will provide an insight. The format in which we can ask the questions, I understand that I should be able to hear people, but they will need to unmute themselves. The alternative is if you put your question in the chat, I will read them out. A question that I would have is, when should I start thinking about my topic for my dissertation?
That is a good question. And I think it's one of the things that really, it's a very personal thing. I mean, as you start the course, you start learning about stuff that you were not as familiar with before.
Yes.
And you want to try and find something that is quite interesting. But I guess the risk is if you commit too early, I think it's probably towards the end of the first year. It's all great to try and plan too early, but you can't do it too early. And one way to get a bit of inspiration is to look at the list of dissertations that the college provides.
Oh, there used to be an actual physical library. You could browse the shelves, couldn't you?
Or you could browse the shelf for those hardbound red volumes. But I think the college provides a document which has the list of all past dissertations.
There's also another resource that students can use. The Alumni Association, your Alumni Association, we run a website which posts the best of the dissertations and hosts those to be accessible. So you can, through the website for the King's College Construction Law Association, access those dissertations, which is not in the real world, it's electronic. We side moment, we put a bit of effort in this year to try and get a new website that would continue to keep that function so current students could use it. I'm not getting any visual feedback because almost everybody, in fact, everybody has got their cameras turned off at the moment. So the next, so I can't see thumbs up, thumbs down. But the other question, that's brilliant. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening. That's so much better when we can see you all. Feels like we're actually doing something together. A question that I have, based on my own personal experience, you start a topic, you think you know you're interested in it, you get a certain way into it, and you think, this is too big, I need to focus, or I'd like to change. So let's say I have chosen the topic, I'm at the stage where I think everyone goes through when they do this exercise of thinking, is it the right topic? What are the considerations to be putting through your mind, Shai, when you're thinking about, should I change horses?
Well, I mean, it's the classic sunken cost fallacy.
You set that one out for us.
Yes, but I think the lesson is you need to do what's best for you, and you need to think what's the best topic that you're going to enjoy and do well with the dissertation.
Yeah.
And the fact that you spent 2 months working on a different topic should be completely irrelevant to that decision. Now, the fallacy is that most of us are humans, so it's a bit difficult to ignore the fact that we've spent all this time. But I think the reality is if you spend 2 months and it's not really working for you, or you discovered that it's not what you thought it would be, or somebody else has written a brilliant paper the year before, then don't be afraid to change courses. People have done it, and you'd be a lot happier doing a topic you like and starting again. And like I said, just because you've invested a lot of time and effort in what you've done before is not a reason not to change topics if the right thing to do is to change topics.
That's really helpful, Shai. And just in that, I think I heard you say that just because someone else has done a dissertation on a topic you're interested in, that should not put you off finding your own angle or doing your own research if it's something you want to get into.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And if you see, there are lots of dissertations about the same topics, and as long as you can write something new, sometimes there's a whole new case that changes the law.
Yep.
So sometimes an easy way of doing it is looking, what dissertations that people did on LADs 10 years ago, you take that and then you update it. But okay. Yes, just because somebody else has covered the same topic, have a look at what they've done, obviously, And if you think you can add to it, update, give a different angle, then it's not a problem.
Fantastic. Well, Shai, that's the time that we've allocated for you. Very grateful for you coming in. I know that you've had to accommodate it with other business. I'm going to let you leave if you need to leave. We're now going to move on to the program part of the remaining of the part of the program. We're going to get our second speaker, George Mello, to come and actually physically join us here. George is a real person. He's not a lawyer like Shai and me. George is actually a mechanical engineer who works for Base Quantum. And the reason he's here is he produced one of the best dissertations of the year in his year, which was 2020, December 2020. I've been asked to point out. His work is not just national in terms of the United Kingdom, but international, which is emphasized by the fact that this very day he got off an aeroplane from Brazil and tiptoed across London in the way that we all used to once upon a time to come over and join us. So the international traveller, Mr. Mello, is going to come and hold forth for you on the topic in a moment. There we go. Let's put you on full screen, and maybe you'd be better seeing everybody. But there you go. I think you got Shai. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. Well, Shai relevantly touched upon many of the points that I was going to touch upon, and it's unsurprising that he was my supervisor for my dissertation. So, well, I'm going to speak about a few points that I think it would be helpful for you. Firstly, my dissertation was a comparative analysis between common law and civil law jurisdiction for experts. So I did, well, I work on an expert witness firm, so it was relevant to what I do. And that goes to one of Shai's advices, that you should follow what is of interest to you and try to come up with your angle. So firstly, choosing the topic for me was was difficult because it was very broad topic to speak about experts. And when I mentioned it in the dissertation meeting at King's, I think it was Barber who was at my group. He said, "Oh, I can't work with this. It's too broad. I don't like it." Essentially, he said to me to change topic, and I agreed it was too broad. But I said no, and I won't change it. I will continue to it until I speak to my supervisor. And when I spoke to Shai, it was the best meeting I ever had, because we kind of decided on what I actually wanted to talk about. He pointed out to me the things that I really enjoy, and he said, "No, do this. How can we do a structure with that?" I said, "Yes, we can do this, and that." And he said, "There you go, go for it, go write it." So it was very helpful to have that structure set out after the first meeting with the supervisor. So that's something that I would push to do. Aside from choosing a topic that you really are keen to do, and that doesn't lose your interest after a while. So yeah, so when I started to do this comparative analysis, I started looking at, firstly, what are the relevant points to talk about? So researching the law in the UK and researching the law in Brazil. As native Portuguese speaker, it was easy for me to deal with the Brazilian law, which I didn't know anything about, but I was interested in it. So I started searching, and at that point in time, it's useful to ask for help. So if you have friends that are lawyers that deal with the law every day, they can point you out to the right direction, and even point out books and parts that you can increment in your research. And some of these books, they're not easy to find as well. So one of the tips that I give to you, because it worked for me, is go on LinkedIn, find the authors of the articles, find the authors of the books, and speak to them, because some of them will be able to speak to you in person, as some of them did to me, and point out the relevant points that they thought that the law should change. And luckily enough, the law in Brazil had changed in 2015. So everything was very recent. And there wasn't much jurisprudence on the points about experts. So that was a plus point that I could explore a little bit more in my dissertation. And also about asking friends for help. I echo Shai's comments about have people to read your dissertation, see if the points that you're trying to make across flow in the dissertation. If your opinion is there as well, if your opinion is well put, this, I think it's very helpful when someone can point to you, look, I don't get the point of this paragraph. It doesn't link with what you wrote before. Why are you putting this here? And you have to, when you write, you have to ask yourself those questions as well. But I would say, especially in the beginning, don't be too thorough. For me, writing chapter 1 before the second meeting I had with Shai was the most difficult one. Because even with the headings there, the structure was there, it was really difficult to do because I was kept asking myself, is this good enough? Is this good enough? Is this good enough? And at some point you have to stop asking yourself that question and just start putting things on paper. Even if it is very shallow in a way, it's still gonna help you with the flow later on, where you're gonna have your other chapters and your main content in your dissertation. And at the end, also, I wrote too much. I think I wrote about 20,000 words and I had to cut it down. So I started looking at my dissertation and said, geez, how can I do that now? It's all interconnected, everything is aligned. And then I looked at my keywords that I had at the time, and my keywords were litigation, arbitration, adjudication. And I said, okay, adjudication must go. I just chucked away everything related to adjudication in my dissertation and cut it down. But I guess it's much easier to cut things down than to write too little, I guess. So that's one of the points that I will give to you. And once you're done, again, ask your friends to read, because they will give you valuable feedback. Just doesn't change too much of your dissertation, because otherwise you go crazy. And I guess that's it.
Right, that's fantastic. That's good for time. I'll shuffle you out, get the next speaker in.
Thank you, guys.
And then we will go through it. Brilliant, George, thank you. This is yet another one of those seamless transitions from one camera to the next, almost as if it was a real studio event. Our next speaker is an architect. Nicola Ibsen is also an expert and acts as an expert on claims, working on defects. She's also a 2020 graduate, also provided one of the top dissertations of her year. I find it quite strange. I'm sitting here taking notes about things that everybody says, even though I don't have to write a dissertation. But I will do a recap for you at the end. Okay.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here this evening to talk a bit about my dissertation. And I definitely benefited. I came to a few of these previous sessions when I was a student, and I think it was really helpful. So hopefully I can also help you guys. So I thought what I'd do is briefly discuss the topic of my dissertation, talk about how I got my ideas, a bit about the process, and then some bits of advice at the end. So firstly, my dissertation was called Do Design Competitions Comply with the Law, and Does the Law Provide a Framework for Finding Value? I am an architect and super interested in procurement. I think what's quite interesting is a lot of analysis of procurement focuses on procuring buildings, contractors, but actually there isn't as much written about how do you procure consultants. And that's basically the subject of my dissertation in the context of public procurement law. So how did I get my idea? Well, I actually started maybe midway through the first year, and I kept a list on my phone if I heard any tutors mention anything interesting, if anything came up in lectures, and I knew that I wanted to write something about design liability, or something about procurement. And then I think by the summer of the first year, I had a list of 6 or so items that I was into. And I spent quite a bit of time researching my top 2 ideas. And actually the first thing that I was planning to do was actually something to do with damages. And I did spend about a month looking into it, actually, spending quite a lot of time in the library. But I turned away from that because it's actually it was going to be very largely factually based, and I didn't think there was enough kind of law in the area. So I ended up deciding to look at procurements and consultants. And what kind of secured the idea for me was actually in one of the lectures about public procurement, the speaker mentioned it specifically, this tension in the law between, say, analysing something that has a subjective quality, but also the very objective requirements of analysing tenders. So at that point, I think maybe a couple of months before Christmas in the second year, I had fixed an idea. So in terms of process, how I developed that, I chose Virginie as my tutor because she had provided some very useful feedback for me on one of my essays, and I felt like even though it wasn't really her area of law, I really got on with her really well, and I felt like we could have a good relationship. And I think actually it doesn't really matter if your tutor is a specialist in your area, because actually there's so many people that you can email and contact, as others have said. And I think that when you actually start researching your dissertation, you really need to be the expert. You need to know more than almost anybody about the subject. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And then I think just carrying out extensive research on the topic. So reading literally everything you can on the subject, any decisions that are cited in decisions, and just really know your area, because what I was looking at specifically, subjectivity in procurement, it is quite a complex and topic, and there's actually been there's a lot of decisions that go in different directions, so it took a lot of time to do that. And then I think the next thing, I think, as everyone's probably said before, your dissertation, you're not writing an essay, you're actually carrying out some research. And the way that I thought about it is you're kind of documenting your journey, you're figuring out your methodology of finding your data, whether you're interviewing people or you're sampling. It's almost like recording that process, and even recording when that's difficult or something goes wrong. So for example, what I did, I was analysing several design competitions against public procurement law. And one of the features of the law is that actually there should be an openness to all of these decisions. So all of the public tenders are supposed to be published online. So I was able to capture a kind of a snapshot of all architectural design competitions that were public at that time, and then I analysed all of those against the law. I was quite inspired by some kind of investigative journalism articles that I read, actually, in terms of the process, to get it in my head that I'm not just writing an essay. I think, again, yeah, don't kind of waste any words on just regurgitating the law if it's not contentious, or if there's not a way that it kind of relates directly to your topic. I think Shai was definitely right before when he was saying, try and focus on a very small area. Because I think my subject's quite wide, but I did focus down on kind of actually a very narrow point of the law. And what else? Yeah, and I think at the end, thinking about where your research fits into everything else that you've read, actually, where do you add to the topic, and what does your bit of writing, like, how can it help the situation? Kind of, what is the point of writing it? And then just 3 bits of advice. It takes a really, really long time. I spent the summer of the second year, I spent so many hours in the library and writing. I think I didn't really write it in a very efficient way. Actually, my method was almost, I had my structure and all my chapters and I kind of filled in bits as I went along. Whereas actually it would have been much more efficient to kind of write the introduction, then write the first chapter. But that wasn't really the way that I kind of, it's not really the way that I used to write, but I would definitely advise doing that. So then you can feed chapters to your tutor. And so they've actually got time to review what you're writing. And then I think, yeah, you're actually, just as I said before, the process of research, I think highlighting how you actually get your information and kind of celebrating that is actually a really good way to think about how you go about it. And then just I think it's a good opportunity for whatever you write as like a small contribution to try and help your area, because I mean it's likely that what you're writing about it'll probably be related to your profession. So how can this small thing, maybe it can help you get into a slightly different specialism, or maybe you can publish it. But I think it's good to think actually how are you adding something, giving something back to your topic. So I think that was about it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello again. What to say about our next speaker? Some people might think we've saved the best till last. I can only say that because Shai's probably left by now. The next speaker is Mr. David Sawtell. And David is, well, what to say about David, really? I mean, David is, again, did one of the most successful dissertations and got 1 or 2 prizes for it. He is a lecturer at King's College. He also lectures at Cambridge University as well. He is a barrister at the most excellent 39 Essex. And he did say that I might, if I wanted, mention some of the prizes that he's won over the years. But since the topic and the time he's got is only 15 minutes, if I did, there wouldn't be any time left for him to tell you how he got his marks in his dissertation. And that's what you really want to hear. David, come on, you're on.
Well, thanks so much, James, for that very glowing introduction. I am slightly longer in the tooth than the other speakers. I finished the MSc in 2017, and I would commend what Shai said about trying to get it published. I managed to rework mine with a new angle and submitted it, and was published in the International Construction Law Review. And what Nicholas said is absolutely right. What you are left with is a tangible piece of original research. So I would certainly agree with the other speakers. I'm a barrister at full-time practice at 39 Essex. I'm now undertaking my PhD at the University of Cambridge part-time. I'm a barrister, I'm not a mathematician. I don't know how those two work. I still don't quite understand. And I still write and I give academic papers. So last year I won the award for best paper by a doctoral student at the Society of Legal Scholars annual conference. And what that taught me was how to do this kind of work in a short space of time. It's interesting, I gave this talk and I'm delighted to be invited back in 2018. So what I'm saying is infused with the enthusiasm of youth from 2018, but also the knowledge of experience. And I have 5 tips, which I would say will be split into 2 main points. Again, I'm not a mathematician. Number 1, dissertation as a piece of legal research, because this is legal research that you and I are undertaking. And secondly, to program your work so as to allow your supervisor to supervise you. So the first tip I'd ask is to ask yourself a question: what is legal research? Because by the end of your dissertation, it should be a question that you will have answered, and you need to be comfortable with methodology, how a law dissertation works, and how it's assessed. And I would absolutely commend an excellent book that's recommended by many others called Writing Law Dissertations by Michael Salter and Julie Mason. And it is absolutely superb. The section on doctrinal legal research is a little bit too acerbic for my taste, but it really does tell you how to write a legal dissertation. And they are very different to coursework and maybe other pieces of work that you've done before. Before I did the MSc, I did an MPhil in medieval history. So I knew what research was. Many of you will know what research is, but it's completely different legal research. And just echo what Nicola said, the KCL scoring criteria for dissertations revolves around research. So excellent research potential, good research potential, some evidence of research potential. That is what we're involved in. So becoming familiar with that model of an introduction, places for dissertation, then having a great research question, knowing your methodology, the limitations of methodology, then the research, and then your analysis. And again, just echo what George has done, Nicola's done, what Shai has discussed very clearly at the outset. It isn't simply about the research, it's about analysing the product of that research and make it original, get an angle on that, and to, yes, get into the academic debate, but then to contribute to the academic debate, to get it to that level where you will be submitting this piece, albeit slightly modified into a journal. So the second tip I would give then is that your research question is incredibly important and it must be manageable. That you shouldn't be indulging in trying to summarize half of construction law in 12 or 15,000 words. And as you research, you will no doubt have to go back to revise it. Don't forget Einstein's PhD thesis was on a useful aspect of Brownian motion. He didn't set out to define quantum mechanics in his PhD. Your contribution will be a narrow but extremely well-researched part of the ongoing discussion about construction law. So with that in mind, I move on to my third tip, which is to approach dissertation like any other serious project that we are involved in our professional lives, to plan the research that you need to do. And once you've carried out an initial literature and case law review, you know what material's out there, and then to take part in a research as an iterative process. This doesn't mean that, oh my goodness, it sounds like an enormous amount of work. Last year, I was invited to give a paper to the Society of Construction Law. I did not have a huge amount of time, but as other speakers have said, it was an area I was familiar with. I'd worked in a number of cases before. I knew what was out there. So I programmed, I set aside time as to where I wanted to be at each stage of my research, my reading, and the secondary works. I kept a folder on the case law. I developed an outline plan, and that outline plan then let me continue to look at the secondary and primary research. So my fourth tip is use your dissertation supervisor well. I had Anthony Lavers, and he was absolutely fantastic. But I think that's probably because I was able to feed him chapters as I went along, and therefore he was able to give me feedback. And I think, as Shai said, other speakers have said, if you give them tangible material, then they can give you tangible feedback back. And I have to say, when I'm supervising at Cambridge, as often my biggest lament is, I need people to give me work so I can give them my input back on that work. Because the best way is to work collaboratively. Sorry to use that. I'm never sure you heard that term before. To work collaboratively with your supervisor. Which brings me to my fifth tip, which is to begin writing sooner rather than later and be prepared to revise it. Get a detailed plan going sooner rather than later. And then with each draft of your plan or each section, you'll see what gaps there are in your research, and then you can go and fill it. Leaving it all till the last minute will give you no time to try and help yourself. You can do it. You can do it. I've done it, but you're not giving yourself much leeway. And one final tip, 5.1, before you get writing, before you get research, know what form of referencing for your footnotes you need to use. I think it's Oscar. What we don't want to do is write 12,000 words and then change 150 footnotes from one format to another. And I had to do that on New Year's Eve for one of my papers, and that's why I'm telling you it now. Don't leave it till New Year's Eve. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck with your dissertations.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Now, if you're anything like me, or if you're anything like I'd like to say I was, but still am, some of you might have your hearts in your boots thinking, my goodness, those guys are all super organized, and look what they did and the plans that they put into place. And just in this closing part of the session, before we move on to the questions and answers, what I wanted to do was just quickly emphasize the fact that each of you will tackle this in your own way, and that the tips that have been given are things for you to adopt and use as best as you may. But if you're anything like me and a procrastinator, and possibly even something of a crisis junkie, then you are going to find that you might actually enjoy the dissertation process, but probably only towards the end of it, after you put off getting on with it. The bit of advice that I would give is, for goodness sakes, do not wait until you've got the results in your exams, never mind done the exams. Hopefully, and one of the reasons we put this event in the calendar for the students is to go, it is coming, you won't be able to put it off. It will make your life incredibly difficult if you try to defer it or seek to defer the dissertation, but it is something that's coming down the track inevitably. If you know the TED talk about the procrastination monkey, you'll know what I'm talking about. If not, go and find it. It's a great little lecture. What David did was he showed us that you can do it, that you can do a dissertation to the level which is required in a short space of time. The note I took from him was, you need to plan it. If you plan it, then you can overcome the time pinch. The other point that I got from him is using your supervisor well, treating it as a serious project, as at least as serious as any work that you've got on any given day, given the sort of long-term strategic nature of a thing like a dissertation for an MSc. That might put it in context in relation to some of your other work activities as well. When I was listening to Nicola, I was reminded that the theory of doing it had to be put into the real world, and the accommodation of the day job as well. If, as you go along in the course at this stage, you keep that little note on your phone of something that piques your interest, and you make the note as you go along, as she suggested, then you stand a chance of when you actually have to go and see a dissertation tutor and say, what are you going to do? You'll have some stuff to discuss with them, and something that's you've been interested enough to write about. She reminds us that this isn't an essay, that, as David says, it's a piece of research. It's a different exercise altogether. Your sources don't have to be purely academic. Your sources can also be journalistic, and the investigative journalism link I thought was quite helpful there, particularly in the field of experts, which is a field that I'm also interested in. There is a bit of overlap into the practice of expert and the way that is done. But it's journalism, not BuzzFeed, so just bear that in mind. The don't waste words point is very helpful, that Nicola also made, again, as an arch procrastinator who, for most of the dissertation writing exercise, felt, my goodness, how am I going to get so many words down on paper? The simple temptation to just write stuff, cite large chunks of text, big bits of judgments, you overcome that. As Nicola says, do not waste your words. It's not just about getting miles on the road and getting the word count up. It's about having material which is worthy of being read and analysed, which is also where George helped us too. George makes the point that we have, with our dissertations, that it is easier to edit, easier to cut, than it is to write the material in the first place. You've got more of a problem if you've got 6,000 words than if you've got 16,000 words and you need to edit down. Now, those who've done it may have different views on that, but it seems to me, from the point of view of hitting a target, filing a piece of work to the requisite standard on time, an editing process will improve it, whereas padding it out at the last minute is never going to make it any better. He makes the point, George, that we ask for help when we need help. It's a thing that we do in our professional lives. The critical point is recognizing the moment and doing it when it's going to make a difference, rather than too late, when all they can say is, yes, you really are in a hole here, maybe you shouldn't have started digging in the first place. So when you need help, use your supervisor. If you're not getting anything out of them, go to the college. Renato, I'm sure, would be pleased to hear from you during this process too. But if you think you need more and you're not getting it, let him know. You might not thank me for that later, actually, but there you go. So get it down on paper, edit it later, is the point I'm taking from that part of the presentation. Shai, gives you the insight of the person who marks these and supervises these exercises. So it's always worth listening to. But the point that he made, which was picked up again by David, was that these are documents that you are working to that you can get published. That if you're looking to become expert witnesses, that if you're looking to become senior solicitors, barristers, whatever it may be, if you get your work published, that is it's a real and long-term feather in your cap. So see what you can do to do that. I liked the sunk cost fallacy. I'll try and remember that and use it in the future. But he also, I'm going to wrap this up in a little phrase. My sister-in-law from Oakland would probably describe it as agency. It's you, it's your dissertation. Make it interesting for you. Make it something that you want to write about. And if the topic is, getting a bit of pushback on it, but it's something you really want to work on, well, keep working on it and make it relevant to you and your practice, and maintain your own interest in it. Those were the observations that I had to wrap up the presentations that you've heard from everybody so far. I really did want to give a shout out to Team Procrastination and Team Last Minute as well. You can do it. I am rooting for you. All those in the other team, you should got lots of notes from that. I'm going to go over to questions now, but before I go over to questions, when we often get the precipice of attendance drop off, I would like to say that your next King's College Construction Law event is going to have Kim Franklin QC talking to you about adjudication, and the rock and roll topic that we've got at the moment is going to be adjudication, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Date yes to be fixed, because we're trying to work out whether we can actually do it in person or whether we're going to be online, but that's the next event. I'm going to now look at the chat and see if there's anything that I'm allowed to read out. And if there are anybody wanting to ask any questions. Sorry about the close-up, as I need to get close to the screen to read it. Apologies for that. I see no questions so far, but does anybody have any questions?
Can I ask a question, please?
I should be delighted if you were to ask a question. Thank you very much.
I'm absolutely, let me just say at the start, I am Team Procrastination, or rather I'm Team Last Minute. And I do thrive under a deadline.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely scared to death of my second meeting with my supervisor, because he will have expected me to write a chapter. And can it be really in draft? Really in draft? Or I can't imagine writing a chapter. I can imagine doing what Nicola did and writing it, doing a jigsaw, which is the way I would normally write an essay.
Yeah. So, okay, the answer to that is it will be down to what the expectation of your supervisor is. Like yourself, I often create a framework and then hang my topics around it, and sometimes wait subsequently the output to what the topics have been and the argument as it falls out in the writing. I do not think that you need to worry about the expectations of your supervisor in that sense. I think you need to worry about what are you doing to get your dissertation delivered, and how are you using that person to help you do that job. It probably won't be useful if they tell you to do a thing that you haven't done, and then you spend 20 minutes sort of justifying why you haven't done it. Not that I've ever had that experience myself, but what do you do? I'd throw it back to you. When is that meeting going to happen relative to the deadline?
That was actually my supplementary.
Okay.
I'm meeting him for the first time next week, and I'm expecting to have a summary of some of the research that I've done and some of the sources that I've got, and talk to him about my subject, which is great, I think. Yeah. But then, by when would you expect to have your second meeting and have written a chapter, which is something that one or two people have said to me who did their dissertation last year. Oh yes, I sent in my first chapter, and I'm thinking,
yeah, that comes down to different people do the task in different ways. It also comes down to when you meet the person, you probably, the way most of us would do in a general meeting, you'll set action points. What next? When's our next meeting? So that probably is the conversation around what do you want and when can you do it? And if you need to manage his expectations in terms of what he's likely to get out of you, then that's the conversation that actually it's not 2 weeks when you've written the chapter, it's 6 weeks when you've chosen your topic and you've got 3 chapters. But that's why I referred, and again, this is at risk of going off topic, but the TED talk about the procrastination monkey, I wish I could find the name of the chap who gave the lecture, he just explains that a project that you spin out over 12 months that you then all deliver in the last month is a completely different undertaking, as anyone who's got anything to do with project management actually knows. I think
I have a note of that. I'll look this up.
Yeah. I think the suggestion is that you scale what you do to what you agree with your supervisor and how that might be useful. I think one of the points I was trying to get over is if that's how you are, that's how you are. You're unlikely to change that just by the simple act of doing a master's course and having to write a dissertation. There are things that you can do to mitigate that.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, please, Nicolette.
As someone who has who does kind of construct chapters by hanging thoughts around the place and then they all come together at the end. Visually, my tutor asked me to write the initial chapter, but the first chapter was actually almost like the introductory chapter, where she asked me to list out definitions effectively. And so that was almost kind of the benchmark of when the rest of the dissertation could kind of grow in further chapters. And it's actually not too daunting to write a chapter of definitions. But to be honest, by the end of the dissertation, I'd stripped out a lot of that information and it became a lot smaller, but it was a really good starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I need to do, and I think what I've picked up today is it doesn't matter what you write from the first chapter because it probably won't be the same by the time you finish your dissertation anyway. So don't sweat it.
Yeah, I think so.
Correct?
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah.
And another useful observation from my colleague Anne Wright is that it is a preamble and a skeleton. Don't think of it as a chapter. No. If you've got a pad of paper in front of you, write the words preamble and skeleton. And if you've got your skeleton, you can put the flesh on it later and the little bones later as well. Okay, don't think of it. So some of you might be able to write words today that will be in the draft that you hand in to Sue Hart in 9 months' time or whenever it is. Some of you will write words now that don't make it to month 2 or 3 and that you would tear them all up and you go again. You have your own different ways of doing it. So the point there is that don't think that just by having written it down, it has to go into the final edit. There is an editing process that goes on constantly. I remember myself rewriting my introductory chapter on a couple of occasions, in part because of the research that I did, and in part because the topic that I was researching, my interest in, changed over time. Now, unless there's anybody who wants to come in on that question, I'm going to see if there are any other questions from the floor. And again, I'm regretting subjecting you to something over close up as my middle-aged myopic eyes attempt to focus on the screen.
Hi.
Hello.
I have a question.
Okay.
So I'm exactly at the stage where I wrote my first chapter, but I'm probably going to have to toss it away and write it again, which is fine. And I'm kind of struggling to distill. I have a very clear idea of what I want to talk about and what I want to cover. And I've been really trying to distill it into a number of questions that then I'm going to answer. My question is, if you start with this set of questions, you can't be guaranteed that you're going to find an answer to them. What happens if you can't really answer and you're just going to an exploration?
Yeah, I've got a glib answer to that. Then I'm going to hand you over to someone who might provide you with a sensible answer. The glib answer is it's a master's in science, and the result that is not conclusive is still, if the process is sound, part of the scientific exercise. But because you've disproved the hypothesis. But I'm going to put you on to David.
I'm going to be much more cynical than James. I'm going to say you shouldn't set yourself up to fail, and your research question, your research thesis needs to be adjusted as you go through the research question. It might be that you have identified an enormous lacuna in doctrinal construction law, and you can say, oh my goodness, there's this thing we didn't realize that never existed before. There's no answer to it. Here's my analytical framework to provide an answer, and no doubt you'll then get an award or something for that. It might just be it's such a difficult area that you actually need to adjust for focus, and no point going so broad and so wide and finding that there's no real definable answer, when actually you need to really narrow and focus it down. So my dissertation title, I reminded myself earlier this evening, looked at quantum merit for unjust enrichment arising out of an anticipated, repudiated or varied contract. Because if I just sat there and wrote unjust enrichment in construction law, I'd end up with everything and nothing. And in terms of my research methodology, I chose comparative law analysis of Australia, because if I'd opened it up to literally the world, then again, it becomes everything and nothing. And if you look at a really good, focused academic paper from a well-regarded academic, not an absolutely full-blown one, but a very well-regarded academic, and you will see that process playing out in front of your eyes as you read it. They are adjusting the research question to ensure it's manageable and you end up with an appropriate answer, because otherwise, I think, unfortunately, you might just be setting yourself up to fail.
Oh.
Does that answer your question?
I think it does, and I take comfort in the fact that my initial list of questions, my supervisors hasn't revised them, haven't seen them yet, and I'm pretty sure that he's probably going to be able to tell me whether I am on a wild goose chase or not.
It sounds exactly like what George was discussing earlier this evening, actually. And the initial reaction from John Barber was this is too wide, but then actually in a discussion, consultation with Shai, is able to produce something into something that's far more manageable and hence became an excellent piece of work. I'm going to hand over back to James. If that's
Thanks very much.
That's really helpful, David. I mean, what really sings through is deliver something that answers, or deliver something that gets you grades and puts you in the position that you will get through the gateway, which is the pass-fail, upper echelons of pass-fail for those of you who are stretching towards those targets. Before I take the next question, I'm just going to take a very brief moment. Having mentioned the next event, I just wanted to thank the people who've been involved behind the scenes to make this event happen. We really are absolutely nothing without Anne Wright, and a personal thanks from her and from all of us for this event happening. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at 3 Paper Buildings, the 3PB team, specifically Lisa, and been involved in putting on the Zoom side and the organisation side of that. So thank you to them from the Society. I am going to then go to the questions and see if there's anybody else. We still have almost all of the people who've signed up to attend the event who've been involved today. Thank you for staying with us till the end. If there are no more questions, we can talk amongst yourselves for a bit. If you'd like to do that, I don't know. I'm just going to put you on gallery so I can see how many. Once again, I can see several of you, but not very many of you. And at this stage, some of you might just like to sort of pop your cameras on so those of you can sort of see who's here. There you go, real people again. Thank you very much. All right. Now, is anyone who's coming and putting their presentation on hoping to, any questions from anybody? No, not even an emoji from anybody in the chat with a thanks but no thanks. Is there an emoji for thanks but no thanks? No, not yet. The world waits. And
about the dissertations on the website.
Thank you.
They're only the top dissertations.
Thank you.
So they will not be given anything that is not worse.
So I would technically be turning my back to the court, to the camera, and taking instructions from the person who actually knows what they're doing, who's sitting behind me, which is, as I said, Anne Wright. She reminds me that your association, we put quite a bit of the money that we raised into having a website and the support that we get from the college into a website that can host the dissertations from years gone by. It would have been very easy for us to ditch that. It's a lot of admin for us to do. But the virtue of it is it takes the top ones, the top 10 or so each year, and puts them in an accessible place online for you to go and read them. Please go and have a look. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we've got some sort of, computer program that tells us whether or not that's being used or not, but it would be lovely when we do have the next meeting, we do check the analytics, that we can see that people have been looking at the dissertations to gain inspiration or ideas of what topics not to do, or as Shai suggested, which dissertations make a jolly good start on the topic, but 10 years on can be taken to a different conclusion by a new student. That's what they're for. So can I commend those documents to you? Some of them really are excellent. I'm hoping that in years to come, some of you will be taking part in this event in years to come when there's a different chairman and it's actually happening in person. But if not, then I will say that I can confirm that the ceremonial suitcase was taken to Tesco's on Fleet Street earlier in the afternoon by one of the clerks, and that since this is a work event, there will be some wine, at least drunk at this end of the screen in the next half an hour or so. We don't have any cheese, however, we do have Ferrero Rocher. So it's not all bad news. If there are no further questions, we'd really love to see you at the next event, whether it's online or, as we hope, in person. And if there are no further questions, I'm going to close it and thank you again for coming along.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
So James, just in terms of finding out about those next events, how best is that done?
Very good question. The easiest way to do that is to send an email to attendance at events in the future. Well, they're on the website, so that's the first thing.
They have to respond to the invitations that go out about a fortnight to 3 weeks before the event. So they will only be able to do that if they are registered as a member of the KCCLA by logging in and registering.
Perfect. Now, I don't know if the microphone picked that up. Our website, kccla.org.uk, that's kccla.org.uk. If you register on that, you'll find two things. Number one, we put up the dates of the events as they're coming. But number two, you'll register with us and you'll go on the magic list that gets you pinged for these events. But if you want to come, you need to tell us in advance and send. There's always sort of confirmation that your attending processes. Just ping us an email that you're coming. So the answer to your question is, we have a website, the events are on there. On the website, there's a way of registering, so we can send you an email to tell you when our events are. And then when you find out about them, register and we will see you.
Brilliant, thank you.
Brilliant.
Would you consider running the future events as a hybrid? The teaching is still taking place in a hybrid form, so not everybody is travelling up to London for lectures or even travelling to the UK for lectures. So there would be a proportion of us who would not be able to come along if they were purely in person.
Right, that's helpful information. It is absolutely fair to say that because it's an alumni association run by people like us, and most of us around London, we probably do have an overly London-centric view of the world. Help us change that, please. And telling us that we need to change it is one of the ways of doing it. So it will probably hinge on what's the event and what's the best way to put it on. Something like this can be done electronically. Most events, you need to go one way or the other. There's nothing wrong with having a camera feed, a live feed of a lecture. It's a bit different, but some of them don't work so well. The answer is we'll try not to forget that that's an important factor. Particularly, we are aware that a great many of the graduate students are overseas as well, which is a permanently important factor. But on the occasion when we're going to go and see a jazz band in Ronnie Scott's, or we're going to have a walk around the temple and talk about the history of such and such got stabbed here, or a body got found over there, or those events will have to be in person.
Thanks, James. That's appreciated.
All right, good stuff. David knows what I'm talking about. All right then, if there's nothing further, and if there is anything further, just drop us an email. If there's nothing further, I will ask Lisa to pull the plug.
Thank you.
Really. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Very much.
Thanks, Noid.
Thank you. Thank you.